So next up, we have Ahmed Guetari, who is the VP of Products for Service Providers at F5. And he's going to talk to us about how we're going to thrive in the age of accelerations. And let's get his slides up. All right, let's welcome Ahmed.
Thank you. Yeah. Indeed, it's great to be here, back seeing everyone face to face. Before starting, I swear I haven't collaborated neither with Wim nor with Kiriti. Kiriti is a good friend. We usually argue. He's usually right, but we haven't collaborated. The difference probably between what I'm going to say and what they're saying is the urgency. And to express that, I'm using this book, Thank You for Being Late, to show how much it is urgent to make the change. This book, written by Thomas Friedman, who's a New York Times columnist, he talks about how fast things are changing. He talks about so many things, and this book makes you think. There are three major forces accelerating at the same time: climate change, globalization, and technology. I'm not going to talk about the entire book. I'm going to talk about few things in terms of technology. He mentioned many things, but he talks about the cloud that he calls supernova and Moore's law, and the impact of Moore's law on terms of exponential growth, as well as the compounded growth, or the hidden power of the compounded growth. The compounded growth is like this king of India, Shirham, who was so impressed and pleased with the chess game. He wanted to thank and reward his inventor. And he asked him, what would you like? The man said, just enough rice to feed my family. That's it? How much would you like? He said, just simply take 1 grain of rice, put it into the first square of the chess. The next day, 2. The next day, 4. And to the last day, 64. OK. But little they know, it was about 18 quintillion of rice, which is about 1,500 to 2,100, the global production of rice. That's the hidden power of compounding growth. And things start slow, but becomes crazy until you hit the half of the chessboard. And Friedman argued in this book, we are entering the second half of the chessboard. That's why things are changing so fast. That's why we are seeing so many changes. And he talks also how difficult for the human mind to grasp this amount of change. So he's giving examples. And in his examples, he's talking about for the Axi-Red, that was the most powerful computer until 1997, and it was processing 1.8 teraflops. The equivalent of the Axi-Red is the PS4, released in 2013. The computer that shot half of the nuclear missiles is in our kids' hands, playing with it, and the ones who didn't get the PS5, that is probably 5 times more. I think it's about 10 teraflops. So this is the kind of the acceleration we're seeing in our industry. But also he talks about the seminal year of 2007 and the impact of the cloud, when the cloud started being used, and he calls the cloud the supernova because it releases massive energy that accelerates the rate of everything and amplifies every single force. He mentioned 2007. It was a similar year. So Steve Jobs launched the iPhone. Facebook, Twitter, Airbnb went global. Google acquired YouTube. Google released Android. Hadoop went public. So 2007 was seminal in terms of innovation. So why I'm telling all of this, if you look what happened in 2007, and you go 10 years later, and you see what these companies became, and 15 years later what happened, there's a huge amount of changes. Meanwhile, our telecom industry is not moving fast. Our telecom industry is still slow. And if you look back in, especially this year, in 2022, NFV is celebrating its 10th anniversary. Exactly 2012, 13 telcos, 13 smart minds posted a paper about NFV, its concept, its enablers, its challenges, and its advantages. And that NFV, that effort was taken by the ETSI, the ISG group. It turned into a very complex framework. It turned to be heavy with acronyms between NFV, O, VNF, VNFN, MANU, VIM, not VIM, the other VIM. And the challenge was very difficult to deploy. NFV ended up, despite the concept, the idea, the so much provocative thinking that brought to the industry, we have to confess the progress isn't material today. And why the progress isn't material? Because as an industry, we did not focus on the right things. But let's say why the progress wasn't material. If you look at it, it didn't change the CapEx for the telcos. The cost per bit didn't go down with NFV. It didn't change the OpEx. Actually, it was very, very complex. The automation wasn't part of it. The automation was afterthought. The fact that every vendor started building its own VNF by taking an existing system, wrapping it in VM format, calling it VNF, it didn't work. The smaller startups who started building VNFs from the ground up couldn't survive because there was no true business case. The MANO, the VNFM, they were custom built. They were not necessarily adaptable to any environment. So it's hard to say NFV was a success. Actually, if we're not afraid of the words, we would say it was a failure that we need to learn from. There are major lessons that we need to learn from these failures. And these lessons are mostly about we should not be focusing on the technology. We should be focusing on solving the real business and technology problems or technical problems. We should not be having a dogma about it. The technology is great, but it is an enabler, and we need to use it for the right purpose. It shouldn't be a marketing slogan, oh, I have an NFV compatible, or I have an SDN compatible. We need to think of the outcome of that technology. Something that got everyone stuck is the operation. Operations were very complex. There was no insight. There was no visibility. There was no observability. Lifecycle management was a nightmare. Upgrading a system was a nightmare. High availability was a nightmare. Nothing was simple. We need to learn, and we're trying to learn as an industry, but that should not be hidden or taking the back seat. And last not least, there is nothing in NFV that focuses on customers. At the end of the day, any purpose you need for any operation, for any initiative, you need to focus on your customers to make sure that they have the greatest experience, to keep them and keep them happy. Okay, so with this, I'm not saying things are so dark. Actually, I do believe it's a great time and a great opportunity because there are so many things coming together. First of all, the service provider business is still good, and if there's something we learned from the pandemic is telco are essentials for all of us, for everything we're doing. And that's from connectivity, from services. The digitization of the industry is still in its infancy, and you cannot do it without telcos. Third, 5G, security are all area for growth. So there is a bright future. We just need to make sure that we learn the lesson and not repeat the same mistakes we did in the past. Okay, so what do we have in front of us? First of all, 3GPP made 5G a little bit more software friendly. 3GPP is using service-based architecture that is nothing but allowing the 5G functions talking through APIs using sort of JSON rapid messages, and they can be deployed where an environment can be supported and operated much easier, provided we take into account what the new cloud native, the new cloud environment helps us, especially when it comes to cloud operation. The most important part is taking into account what we learned from cloud operation, and instead of having the high availability that supposed to be the old model based on hardware, high availability, is taking into account what we learned from the cloud environment. And there are examples of service providers who learned very fast. One of the examples, and it's always a pleasure to have such customers as a partner, is Rakuten Mobile. They started the experience with NFV. They learned a lot from that NFV, and they're applying their lesson at very high pace for the cloud journey. And instead of taking all the models, they're taking the new models, and the operation is much more SRE-oriented, or service reliability engineering, based on the cloud operation, finding insight on the network and the performance of the network on their users, and fixing things the same way as a cloud provider will fix them. So this is one of the examples, and I'll talk a little bit about it. Now, having said that, the reality is you cannot take a telco environment and transplant it in a cloud environment. There are some challenges that need to be solved, especially if you look at the component, the 5G functions. They're not communicating with just simple HTTP. The interface is HTTP, but the content is a diameter protocol, and the diameter protocol relies on a CTP. And for the ones who had the opportunity and the pleasure to secure SCTP, is not easy. Service provider and the 5G functions, they treat subscribers, customers, and they need to manage their statefulness. They need to manage their situation. Building high availability in that environment, it's not that simple. You need to make sure that you have the right things. Now, there are ways of doing it. What we're observing now, for example, most of the 5G design are taking the old hardware and transplanting it to the cloud. For example, HA today is not based on function or container. It is based on a Kubernetes cluster. Most of the deployment of early 5G, if you have a Kubernetes cluster fails, you need to move to the next Kubernetes cluster. The Kubernetes cluster is managed or treated like if it was a chassis with blades. That's not the right model. The right model is you need to think of functions one by one, and if a function or pod or container fails, it fails to the next one within the same cluster or a different cluster. And this is the kind of challenges we need to solve as an industry, and we're taking some of our part to solve these challenges. One of the first things we started looking at it, and based on our experience on running cloud and IT, we did look at these functions. First of all, there are a few things that need to be solved that are very much related to the environment. First of all, you need to make sure all your networking runs in high performance. You need to support the various options, whether you're talking about SRIOV, the PDK, or any offload in terms of smart NICs or the upcoming DPU. That's something important. Some of the workloads, some of the components have to work on a real-time environment, and that's also some of the optimization you can have in your system and adapt it to real time. Is it the most important thing? Probably not necessary, but it comes a time it's going to be important. However, you need to make sure that your system interfaces on existing environment. You're deploying this cloud environment in a data center that has a spinal leaf that mostly SDN provisioned and configured, And you need to be aware of your environment. You need to be aware of your leaves. You need to speak BGP. You need to make sure that the HA, or the high availability environment, is in line with your data center environment, regardless of the technology you're using. What becomes difficult is when you have your 5G function, your AMF, your SMF, or UPF, you need to manage them as a container. You need to take into account, as I mentioned, the protocols that you have inside, and you need to take into account the statefulness of these protocols. These aren't easy, but if you don't handle them the right way, you're not necessarily going to take the full benefit from your Kubernetes or cloud infrastructure. The second part is there is great opportunity to leverage the public cloud. Public cloud has brought lots of value to the industry, but we have to recognize not every workload can go to the public cloud, especially in the current environment. Some of the workload, for sovereignty reason, for technical reason, for probably a business reason, cannot go there. However, you should be able to leverage them whenever you can. And we're ending up with a sort of this very complex environment where you have a hybrid and multi-cloud environment, and applications that are sitting in your private cloud, or applications that may be sitting in your public cloud, and you're overlaying your existing infrastructure, whether it's MPLS, VPN, or SD-WAN, connecting them through multi-cloud. There are technology that allow them to be connected. However, the complexity is killing it. Connecting all of them is not simple. Maintaining it is not simple. Securing it is absolutely a failing objective, because you're ending up with a spaghetti environment. Why? Because you're still looking at the network as routers and firewalls, while reality, all these applications are communicating through different paradigms. Applications are not anymore centralized in the data center. They're split, and they're not monolithic anymore. They're microservices. So the way you should look at it is the network is sort of your API gateways are your new routers, and your API securities are your new firewall. And this is how you need to look at it. You need to layer on top of it and build your application on top of it. And this is something actually, I'm going to say like Curity or Wim. This is something you can see today on the demo in our booth. So the way you can think of it, your infrastructure, it has to be independent. It can run in any public cloud when you need. You can disaggregate from the hardware. Hardware is extremely important. Sometimes we tend to forget how important hardware is for software. Is extremely important, but you need to have that independence and that aggregation. You need to be able to connect the environment and secure, run your application, and the most important thing, the simplicity in terms of management and lifecycle operation, or operation lifecycle management. Extremely important. This is where the OpEx and the agility come. And the last point that NFV failed is building a true cloud native, or building true VNFs. Today, I've been hearing the session of Etsy. We're talking about cloudifying VNFs. Actually, we should build cloud native function, or CNFs, from the ground up. It's extremely important to make sure they're API-driven, they're CRD-enabled, they're lightweight, they can scale horizontally. These are all extremely important, but you need to be able to consume them wherever they are, in your private cloud, in your public cloud, or in your partner cloud. And this is what we have announced today. We've been working for some time with Rakuten, and in addition to the fact that Rakuten is consuming our CNFs that we announced also at the same time for their own 5G, now these CNFs are available to everyone through SIM-World. It's a marketplace. You can consume them the same way you can consume anything, but you have all that security and policy aspect. So again, this is the value of owning the technology, but not being dogmatic about it. You need to make the technology simple, and you need to think of operation. In our case also, these CNFs could be consumed through our own distributed cloud. Our distributed cloud today allows you to have these thin layers that connect between the various environments, simplify operation. But if you want to consume the CNFs, you can consume the CNFs from the distributed cloud. So yeah, the journey is ahead of us, and there are many lessons learned. We do believe we can accelerate, help the industry to be accelerated. We should not be dogmatic about the technology. I like from intent to experience. This is probably a different level. Instead of, I think Kiriti is talking about the infrastructure. We're talking about the application. We have the opportunity to leverage what the 3GPP is doing, what the Kubernetes and the public cloud are doing, but we need to think of simplicity, especially when it comes to operation. There are many lessons learned from NFV. We should not be shy about this lesson and applying them, because I do believe, and we all believe, there is great opportunity for the service provider, especially in this environment. As I mentioned, most of what I've been talking about is available. It's not necessarily just PowerPoint. It's the demos that we can show, and we can allow technology to be consumed where it is needed in an open way without being dogmatic, and the key is always simplicity. Thank you very much.